If I don't back Longhouse Poet this year and he actually won the race, I would be as sick as a dog. And he's probably going to go down in Grand National folklore as the greatest Grand National loser of all time.
Everyone wants to know who you are going for as well. So who do you fancy in the Grand National?
Hello and welcome to the Inside Track, brought to you by William Hill, and we are back looking ahead to the most famous race of them all, the 2023 Grand National, and William Hill are the official betting partners of the Grand National. I will be reunited with James Mackie in due course, but before that we have a very special guest joining us, and to be honest, we couldn't really have got anyone any better for this particular show, because Darren Owen, commentator extraordinaire, as well as Grand National buff, is joining us. Darren, great to have you with us. Thank you so much. How are you?
Yeah, I'm well. It's a pleasure to be here on the biggest week of the racing year.
It is, isn't it? And like you say, and so much to look forward to. And the hype just gets bigger and bigger every single year, doesn't it?
It does. I mean, this is our shop window event. It is the biggest horse race in the world, bar none. It's the most watched race, as we all know. It's the most bet on race. And that's not just Britain alone. I think we're talking globally here. It really is. It's just a magnificent race. It just captures the imagination. You know, the Australians have got the Melbourne Cup. That's the race that brings the nation to a standstill. This is our Melbourne Cup. This is head and shoulders above anything else we have got in horse racing in this country. Yes, the Cheltenham Gold Cup and the Derby and the other great races, wonderful races, but this is head and shoulders above all other races when it comes to the TV audience it attracts and the betting turnover.
Exactly, like I say, and so important to the sport that we have this race as well. But just in terms of your own memories of the race, kind of what was your first initial memory of the National, and kind of what really sort of brought you into loving this race?
Well, it goes back to 1973. I was very lucky. I was brought up during the Red Rum era. I mean, what better time to be brought up, and for racing to be out there, just being captivated by this wonderful sport and this wonderful race. In 1973, I was only 5, and I just remember, it's funny the things you can remember. I remember my dad saying, right, do you want to take an interest in the National? Which horse would you like, to bet on? Obviously, 10 pence each way as it was. And the horse that I saw in, I think it was the Horse and Hound magazine, was Spanish Steps. Now, Spanish Steps was a very, very popular horse at that time, because in '69, Spanish Steps had won today's films of the RSA chase, the 3 Mile Novice Chase, the Cheltenham Festival. He then went on to win the Old Hennessy, and he was a horse that was going places, and he was placed in the Cheltenham Gold Cup, and he was placed in the Grand National in 73, 74, and 75. And he was the first horse that captured my imagination running in that race. But what a race that was, 1973. It was an epic Grand National. It was it was full of quality. When you look at the 3 top weights in that race, you had Crisp sharing top weight with Les Carr, who had already won 2 Cheltenham Gold Cups. Spanish Steps was only like a £1 lower. And then we had this emerging talent further down the handicap, a horse called Red Rum, who'd been in good form, and he'd been aimed at this race. He wasn't a household name then, and the rest is history. I mean, Crisp was given the most wonderful ride by Richard Pittman. Basically, Crisp was a 2-mile champion chaser, running over 4.5 miles. Great big Australian steeplechaser. And he jumped for fun that day. And he's probably going to go down in Grand National folklore as the greatest Grand National loser of all time. He was conceding an awful lot of weight to Red Rum. I think Red Rum had 10.8 on his back. Crisp had 12 stone, and he jumped for fun. Michael O'Hare, who was doing with the commentary, in fact, the section that I'm actually going to be broadcasting from this weekend, he actually said in his commentary, Crisp is jumping these fences as if they were hurdles. And that was the case. And then, of course, in the dying strides, he was caught by this horse called Red Rum. And Peter Bromley, if you ever have a chance to listen to the old radio commentary of that Grand National, and bearing in mind, it's as it happens, a live broadcast, I thought Bromley really captured the moment. He said, and Red Rum comes sailing past Crisp, and the others don't matter. You'll never see a race like this in 100 years. It is the greatest horse race you will ever witness. And that was my introduction to racing and the Grand National, 1973.
It's no wonder then, is it, that it's stuck with you ever since. You were lucky enough to have been brought into it in that era, like you say, one of the most impossible races to, well, we'll never see the like of it ever again. But you did just say, though, Darren, that you will be back in action, though, this weekend and commentating again. So what are you up to?
Yeah, I have a weekend retreat, which I go to every year in early April. And it's a commentary position up a big scaffolding tower with my back to the Leeds-Liverpool Canal. I'm overlooking the canal turn. So I'm part of the 5 Live commentary team. John Hunt, the lead commentator in the grandstand. Martin Harris takes over the first few fences. And I'm the Beecher's Canal turn man. So I'll be take the field over Beecher's Brook, Foynaden Fence Canal turn, onto Valentine's Well, hand over to Gary O'Brien. But that's my weekend retreat, my little position at the canal zone.
You've got the best section, I think. I think that would be the one I'd want, with all the exciting different fences in that bit.
Yeah, I've got some of the the signature fences of the Grand National. I am really lucky. The first thing I actually say in the Grand National is, and the field are approaching Beecher's. That you go in cold because because obviously I'm a country commentator, and that is literally the first thing I will say on Saturday afternoon. The field approaching Beecher's. But yeah, very, very exciting. Canal turn. What happens at the canal turn? Because obviously the fence is at a 90-degree turn, and what happens nowadays? Horses don't really fall there. It's jockeys get unbalanced as the horses take that sharp left-hander, and you think as a commentator that they're all over it. And as they go to Valentine's, you're looking down, there's about 3 or 4 jockeys on the floor. They've just got unbalanced, made their exit through the side door. But yeah, very, very exciting part of the race course.
Is that the most challenging fence then to commentate on, the canal turn? Because like you say, you've kind of got the melee of horses, and then you've just sort of got jockeys strewn on the floor, trying to figure out exactly who's gone at that point.
I think nowadays it is, but we're lucky because the commentary position is actually overlooking the canal turn. And it used to be near a Beecher's Brook, and it was felt that, look, there was a lot more happening at the canal turn, so the commentary position was relocated. I am a fair distance from Beecher's, so with Beecher's, what I tend to do, as they approach Beecher's, I will look at the TV monitor, because you can get horses pulling up on the second circuit in particular at the back. But as they just strides away from the fence, then I will actually pick up the binoculars and watch the field jump Beecher's Brook. It's one of those races, though, the Grand National, where you're pretty lucky in that you tend to know the horses. Well, I say you tend to know the horses. I mean, this year's is like an Irish Grand National. There's so many Irish horses. But what makes the National difficult is, obviously, from a commentator's point of view, there are 40 horses. But you do tend to know the horses. Obviously, you have the big owners now, like Jigginstown and Jake McManus. They'll have several runners. So you need to get your head around the different coloured caps. You're just hoping there's a few grey horses in the lineup. That always helps. And then what makes the National difficult is you've got to have your eyes everywhere. There's so much going on. The one part of the course I've never covered, and I'm not really queuing up to cover this part of the course, is the first line of fences. I also think the commentator on the embankment covering the first few fences has got the hardest job in the National, because that commentator is going to be looking at 40 horses charging to the first fence. Where do you look? And really, it's a case of, it's very hard to give an order, because the order hasn't really formed over the first few fences.
So that, like you say, that would actually be the most challenging point. 'Cause that's what I was going to ask is, does the National present a whole different challenge to other races? But do you kind of feel by the time they've got to your section of the track, it's more of a formulaic, what we tend to expect from a race?
No, I think it's after my section, Kate. I think, to be honest with you, I think it's once they've jumped Valentine's, which is fence 9, then I think, horses start to get into a rhythm, and the order has, at that stage, formed. But I think it's a bit helter-skelter, shall we say, over the first 9 fences. Second time round, obviously, the race has taken shape. But yeah, probably the first 9 fences. Always remember Richard Pittman saying, we're talking about Richard Pittman riding Crisp. Richard Pittman's actually said, you hunt round for the first circuit. It's survival on the first circuit. You play jockeys on the second circuit. That's when you ride your race.
Play jockeys, exactly. I've heard that from many a jockey, to be fair. They just say you are just concentrating on getting round at that stage. Now, we know that you obviously aren't just a commentator, though, because you know your form inside out as well. And you are there in the studio actually for Racing Radio today. But if you had to give any advice to anyone coming into the sport, any sort of newbies, £1 each way stakes and such like that, on anything to look for the National, what particular one thing would you advise them?
I think it's a case of I think obviously you're looking at horses that you feel that should stay the trip, stay 4 miles plus, because it's a unique distance. We don't have many races over this sort of trip. And over the years, a pattern was emerging with the National where you were looking at horses in the sort of high 10 stone bracket, sort of 10.5 up to 11 stone. Things are different now. Things are just that the race is a different race now. It's just taking a different shape. Yeah, you know, the Aintree factor isn't as big nowadays because at one time, you know, the Aintree factor came into a horse that had previous experience. There's nothing wrong with previous experience, though. Nothing wrong with previous experience. And I'm looking at 1 or 2 horses that have been there before, not won it, but have been there before. But yeah, you know, the favourite this year, you know, Korat Rambler. A lot of people may think he's short. He's never been around the Grand National course, but he looks as though the way he runs that he will stay the trip. He certainly finishes off his races really well. So it's about stamina as well as jumping, obviously, but stamina.
Yeah, exactly. I say stamina to the fore, less of the Aintree factor because of the change up of the fences as well. So they are just a few things to look out for. Now, I am going to get Darren's tip then for the National, but in this next section, we're going to bring James Mackie back in and look ahead to plenty of the Grade 1 contests as well. Now, we're going to be looking ahead to plenty of the Grade 1 contests on the 3 days of the Grand National Festival, as well as getting Darren Owen's own tip for the National itself. And James Mackie, back with us. How excited are you for this weekend?
Oh, yeah, can't wait, Kate. Look, we were speaking, weren't we, before with Gordon Brown. He was saying 11 Grade 1s across the 3 days. And then, obviously, we finish with the National, the big one. There's so much great racing. We've got horses that... We've had this extra week, haven't we, this year from Cheltenham. So you'd like to think that the Cheltenham factor might not be as much as it was last year because we saw a lot of horses run at Cheltenham that didn't go on to perform to the best level at Aintree. I think this year we might see something slightly different, and obviously we'll cover that, won't we, in the races we're going to look through. But I just can't wait for these 3 days.
I know, exactly. We're going to start on day 1 as well, which is the Thursday, where we have the Grade 1 Alderhay Aintree Bowl Chase over 3 mile 1. What a lineup we have in this race. And just as a note, because of everything that's been going on in the news over the last few days with John Dance and his company, that we have had the confirmation this morning that Brave Man's Game is allowed to run in this race, but in the sole ownership of Brian Drew, which I, for one, am very happy to see Brave Man's Game taking his chance here, James, because he adds just another layer of fantastic intrigue to this race. But your thoughts?
Yeah, he really does. And I'm exactly the same, Kate. I'm so glad that this horse is running because he's my selection in this race. We are recording, 12 o'clock on Tuesday, so the decks are out now for this race. The other race we're going to cover will be anti-post, but I still think this horse, it was around 3-1, just cut into 11-4, William Hill, as I'm looking. I think that's huge value because he's got the least to prove in this field compared to all the others. This is an absolutely cracking race, Kay. Shishkin, he's at the top of the market, 11-4. Absolutely love Shishkin. Thought he'd have a great chance in the Ryanair. Look, it didn't happen for him. He smacked nearly every fence, and his show going up the hill, he needs way further. The Gold Cup was probably the race he should have gone for. I can understand why they went for the Ryanair because it was the right thing to do off the back of that Ascot Chase win. But you look at what he did, how he even finished that close in second behind Envoy Allen, I'll never know because he didn't jump well enough. He stayed on brilliantly. He'll love this extra trip. But I couldn't be having him at the top of the market there after the way he jumped. You look like also through the field. Aplutard, obviously, I thought was a little bit more back to himself. In the Gold Cup, he had some bad luck in running, didn't he? I thought he was going to run a big race. I don't think he was going to win that day. I think he was going to run a big race. So it was nice to see him back. So I can understand why he's got a chance in this. Conflated ran an absolute cracker as well. I can also see why they're very similar, 9-2, 5-1 in the market. Ahoy Senor will probably go from the front and was in a great rhythm, I think, in the Gold Cup. And Aintree is his track. He's beat Brave Man's Game twice at this track. So if he's going to do it, he'll do it here. But for me, I just can't get past Brave Man's Game. And I know Aintree is a big factor with this horse. He's turned up here, twice now, and hasn't ran well in any of his races. But I think Brave Man's Game this season is a completely different horse. He's a more rounded, more professional version of himself. And there was a lot of thoughts, wasn't there, over the last few seasons, over hurdles and fences, whether this horse would stay that Gold Cup trip, whether he'd stay that King George trip. Well, this season, he showed us that he definitely does, doesn't he? Obviously, in the Charlie Hall Chase starting off this season was a brilliant performance to beat Ahoy Senor. And that just set him up perfectly for the King George, where I was against Brave Man's Game in the King George. I was all over Long Press. I just thought if that horse ran, he'd stay further. Well, I had egg on my face because Brave Man's Game, even though Long Press fell, Brave Man's Game would have won that comfortably, I think, after jumping the last. And then obviously waited on before going to the Gold Cup. And if it wasn't for Galloping de Champs, we'd be looking at Paul Nicholls having another winner of the Gold Cup. I know he hasn't really won it since the likes of Denman and Quarto Star, but Brave Man's Game for me, he's got to be named with those horses for what he's done this season. Not saying he's at the same level, but the same horses that Paul Nicholls has had, because I just think he definitely stays the trip. This is exactly what he wants. And when he's come to Aintree over the last few seasons, obviously he missed Cheltenham, didn't he? Last season, and then came here. But what Paul Nicholls was saying was that he was absolutely bang on for his day at Cheltenham. So for him then to not run and 3 weeks later, you've got to wind him up again. It's very, very hard. I think the plan always this season has been King George to go to the Gold Cup and then finish off strongly at Aintree. I think at 11-4 at the top of the market, he should be much shorter. He's got less to prove than the whole field. I think he should be 2-1. And if you get an 11-4, I think he's the player. So even though it's a bit long-winded, I've gone through the field, Brave Man's Game for me, I think he's got less to prove. And I think he goes and wins.
That was a brilliant rundown of the field then, and for those that are going to be taking him on, and made the very good case, the fact that he could arguably be shorter as well. And he did say about Hoyson, interesting though, because of course Brian Hughes takes the ride now this time, Darren, because Derek Fox did get that fall at Wetherby the other day, injured himself. He's hoping to get back for Corrick Rambler, but that's his main aim, so he's having to sacrifice his ride on a Hoyson Yule. But have you got any other views then to James on this race?
Well, it's beautifully summed up. I'm actually jealous of Brave Man's Game because Brave Man's Game had a kiss from my missus a couple of weeks ago. Because a few days after Cheltenham, we went to Paul Nicholls' yard in Ditchit because my daughter works there, and got a great photo of Brave Man's Game. But yeah, he was campaigning, with obviously the Gold Cup in mind. The stable were really bullish. Paul Nicholls really bullish. And what a tremendous race he ran in the Gold Cup. Yes, he got very, very tired in the last 100 yards. But this year, as you've already highlighted, 4 weeks between Cheltenham and Aintree. Please note, BHA, this is a no-brainer. This must happen every year, 4 weeks between the two meetings. He's the form horse. As you've already said, he's got less to prove. Yeah, I'd be with Brave Man's Game. But Ahoy Senor, I did feel for Ahoy Senor supporters, their connections, because he got into a lovely rhythm and he was jumping so well until he capsized at the top of the hill. So this track might play to his strengths. If some people do have a theory that Brave Man's Game it would be better served by a flat track. Look, he came up the hill all right. So with the last 100 yards, he emptied in the Gold Cup. He ran a blinder in the Gold Cup. But Brave Man's Game, I don't think it'd be a problem going around here. 4 weeks after Cheltenham. Shishkin, I thought Nico de Boinville gave him a good ride at Cheltenham. I know he was in defeat, but I still thought he gave him a good ride to finish where he did, all things considered. But I must admit, going into Cheltenham, I was one of those crabbing that Ascot form. I wasn't sure how strong that form was going into Cheltenham. Yeah, he's still got to prove it over 3 miles. Of course, he's got a former Gold Cup winning race after he's on. It's a wonderful race, this. It really is a wonderful race. But yeah, I'm going to go with the form horse and Brave Man's Game.
Both of you then with Brave Man's Game. We'll see if that agreement continues into the Friday, because we have the Grade 1 Marsh Chase, also known as the Melling Chase over 2 mile 4, where Fakir Dudery bids to win this race for the 3rd year running. So how do you see this one?
Oh, I've got question marks here.
That's all I was going to
start. Fakir Dudery, in my opinion, has just not been the same horse this year. He was lucky to win. He was lucky to win at Thurles. He really was lucky to win at Thurles. He was totally trounced at Ascot behind Shishkin. I've just mentioned about, I'm not sure how strong the Ascot form is. Pick Dory comes into that, of course, because he was second in the Ascot race. And then Hitman. I don't want to grab a graded horse, a top-notch horse, but he's such a nearly horse, Hitman. So I'm just finding the whole race a real puzzle here. Do you know what I'm going to put up at a price? Is Fury Road.
Oh,
call me stupid. Call me stupid. But this 2 outings ago, I actually backed this horse at Cheltenham. A bit disappointed at Cheltenham, but he ran such a big race at the Dublin Festival behind Gallopman de Champs. He was still there turning into the straight, jumped Urascovy at the final fence, and then just sort of emptied on the run in. So I'm going to put up Fury Road at the prices.
8-1 about Fury Road, I will give you. But Darren said there, though, James, question marks over a whole host of these runners. A really competitive, likeable contest, but doesn't make it any easier.
The thing with this races is what you love about horse racing and what you love from a punting perspective, I think, because I think a lot of races, when we look, especially National Hunt, it's all about problem solving. And this is a race where you've got to solve some serious problems, because all these horses in here, they've got holes in them. But you've got to try and find an angle, haven't you, with each different one, why you want to select it. Look, I think what Darren said about the Ascot forms, obviously, he's come on to be right, because Shishkin didn't perform probably to his best level, even though he ran on well for second. For me, Pick Dory's always been a horse that's been a Grade 2 horse, never been a Grade 1 horse. He's been tried in Grade 1s, never performed. He's been running 4 runner Grade 2s, and he's bolted up. I don't think even though this year he's been better than ever, and he's been jumping better than ever, and he hasn't took those tumbles that he has previously in his career, I don't think he's a Grade 1 horse. Saying that, it's a Grade 1 without many Grade 1 horses in the race. Hitman, look, he's a horse that's flattered to deceive nearly every race. I know Paul Nicholls has talked about this horse being the one that has probably got away all throughout his career, that hasn't gone on to win those races, finished second and third in big races. What he did at Cheltenham, though, I thought was very, very good, actually. I thought he ran an absolutely cracking race behind Envoy Allen and Shishkin. But again, it's like setting up to be the bridesmaid again. He's not actually winning a race. Fugitive's a handicapper coming into a Grade 1, but I think it's very progressive and has done very well. And obviously getting a mark of 153 now, it just shows how much he shot up through the ranks over this season. Miller's Bank's interesting because he's a course and distance winner. I think he won the Manifesto, didn't he? But again, you go down there and you're getting prices. And Fury Road, obviously in there behind them. I thought Fury Road did have a chance at Cheltenham as well, but didn't run the race it probably thought of. So look, you go through all that, and the one I haven't mentioned is Fakir Duderies, and that's what I'm going with. Because the angle I've stayed on with this, and I've mentioned already, haven't I, during our Cheltenham, the Inside Track shows, I've mentioned that this horse, like Darren said, has not been the same all season. Completely agree with that. But what you do find with some horses is that they just come right at certain tracks. And if you look at what he's done at Aintree over the last 2 seasons, in probably better renewals than what this is shown to be at the moment, he's gone on to win and win very well. If you look what he did to Hitman last season, he looked in all types of trouble against Hitman. Hitman didn't find as much. He absolutely kept finding and won fairly easily. I think close to 6 lengths. The time before that with Nutswell was going into the race, running really, really good races. 11 lengths that day, absolutely bolted up. I think what Darren said, he's absolutely bang on at Thurles. I think Horse on Colours, if he wouldn't have fell, would have probably gone on and won that race. I know there's been a lot of dubious discussions with a lot of different tipsters and punters that might have thought he'd gone the other way. But the time before that, the run behind Galloping de Champs and the John Durkin was an absolutely cracking start to the season. So for me, yes, the runner, Ascot, wasn't very good. He never turned up that day at all and he didn't go a yard. So I discount that. Not going to Cheltenham was the right thing for me if he's going to go for this race. And currently being one of only 2 course and distance winners in the field, I think Fakir Duderies is probably my way to play it. Off for 55 days, having a bit of a larger break than maybe some. I just think he's going to land a hat-trick of renewals in this race. So yeah, Fakir Duderies for me.
Oh, I absolutely adore that horse, so I really would love to see that as well. And on Saturday, we have the Grade 1 Liverpool Hurdle over 3 miles and a half a furlong. These thing hurdlers, they're back from the hall, James, and it's Mary's Rock who heads away. And if she wins this, do you think connections might rue the fact that they went for the mare's hurdle instead of the stairs? But she didn't really give much of her running anyway at Cheltenham, so can she bounce back here and justify her 3-to-1 price tag?
It's a really tricky one, isn't it? And that is the thing that puts me off this horse, is that 3-to-1 price tag. I love Marie's Rock. I was saying to you, wasn't I, all the way up to the lead up to Challenge, she's got to go to the stayers. If she went to the mares, it'd be a much tougher race. I think the ground didn't help at all. They probably made the decision for the connections because when she's stepping up to 3 miles on what was soft ground, and you probably get slightly better ground on the Tuesday, like they were thinking, over slightly shorter, they might have think, oh, we made the right decision. Obviously, through the race, they made the wrong decision because she ran no race at all. And it was sad to see, really. But just from a price perspective of this at 3-1, I can't go with her again, because at the moment, if you look through what the ground could be, there's certain different places saying it's good to firm. They're going to have some rain. I'm looking at good to soft, good in places at the moment, good to soft on the national course. That could change. There is rain supposed to come today, tomorrow, and a little bit on Thursday. Friday and Saturday is supposed to be a little bit drier. So I think they'll be good in the description and soft. I think it'd be good to soft personally for me. And that for me then brings in Home by the Lee. And you know I really like this horse, and I just hope he does turn up here. And I know we're talking anti-post and we don't know where it's going to come, but I do hope Home by the Lee turns up, because if he wasn't for that mistake during the Stayers Hurdle, I think he'd have gone on to run a really, really big race. That mistake absolutely blew him out of the water. He still ran on really well up the hill. He only finished, half a length? I think he was shorter than that, actually, behind Flooring Porter, back in fourth. Obviously, we had the other three, Dashel, Cider, Burley, and Tia Hoop, who are also in this race. For me, Tia Hoop needs really, really soft ground. I'm not sure he's going to get that. Cider, Burley, look, I know he did it, and he did it for Leona, didn't he? 80-1, absolutely massive price, but I just can't have him. I just can't have it. 11 years of age. I know he won this race last year, but you know, he just got on the wrong side of some horses. I just couldn't have him. I think Dashel Drasher again will need soft ground. So I think the nicer ground will play into Home by the Lee's strengths. I think what he's did prior to this season, obviously in the Christmas Hurdle before that and the Lisbon Hurdle, he's beaten some very good horses over in Ireland. I'm going to give him one more chance. He's currently 6-1 in the market, so you're getting a better price of the ones I've just mentioned ahead of them. I think Marie's Rock's slightly too short, but she could be the class act. I'm just going to give one more chance to Home by the Lee, and just hopefully he doesn't make mistakes and runs his true race this time.
We were on him the whole way through, and like you say, it was just so frustrating that he didn't come good then at the right time where we really wanted him to at Cheltenham. But that is our Grade 1 races, or the 3 big Grade 1 races across the 3 days done. But Darren, before I let you go though, I have promised viewers that we will get your Grand National tip. So if you've got one prepared for us, we would love to hear it.
Well, it's one of those races where people write a shopping list out. I mean, my mother, for instance, probably back about 12 horses. It's one of those races where, you know, you have 2 or 3 against the field. We know the favourite, Solid, Correct Rambler. He's short enough for a Grand National. Just to throw a few horses your way, if I don't back Longhouse Poet this year and he actually won the race, I would be as sick as a dog, because I was on this horse Big Style last year. He was prominent throughout. He just emptied from about the second last fence. Maybe if they just ride him with a bit more restraint, I just think he's got a Grand National horse profile in him. So I'm going to give Longhouse Poet another chance. And then looking at this season's form, I've been taken with the big dog, the way this horse has gone about his business. Yeah, there's a lot of soft ground form in the book. He was running a big race at Leopardstown at the Dublin Festival. Before he capsized there, he's a horse who won the Troy Town Chase, so I think he's definitely shortlist material. And I know people like to back outsiders in the national. Now, at the time of recording, this is a horse that's around about 50-1. Roi Mage, who was actually second to Longhouse Poet at Downroad. This is a horse that actually, beaten a long way. It was a few years ago. It was actually placed in the Grand Steeplechase de Paris, believe it or not, when it was trained in France. So that horse at a price, Delta Work, strong claims on last year's form as well. And he's coming into this race in good form. He's better off of the weights with the front too from last year. So they'd be the horses on the short list. Longhouse Poet, I've got to back Longhouse Poet, having backed it last year.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I think when the horse that you backed last year, if you side against him, you can guarantee they'll go close for next year. And I could just see a little smirk on James Mackie's face there for Roy Mage as well, as you were saying that there, Darren. 50-1 shot, a horse that James has been talking up a fair bit as well. So that was further bolstering his thoughts. So Darren, thank you so much for your time today. Best of luck this weekend. I hope all goes well for you. And thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Kate. It's been a pleasure.
Well, a big thank you to Darren for coming on and telling us all about his Grand National thoughts, memories, and everything in between. Now, we have asked a lot of our William Hill ambassadors for their own tips ahead of the Grand National. Some fascinating insight and selection. So here's what they thought.
Got it in my heart that because it won the cross-country chase at Cheltenham, and I was on then. I'm going to be on again. The horse owes me nothing, so I'm emotionally involved. Go to work miracles.
My pick for the Grand National is Mr. Incredible, because that's what we'll all be calling Mikel Arteta when Arsenal win the title. My pick for the Grand National is Cocoa Beach, because that is where I'd rather be.
So it's the Grand National this weekend. I'm going to go for Mr. Incredible. Need I say more?
Well, great to hear from all of the ambassadors there, James. Some really interesting selections, but of course, they have got their own way of picking out their horses. We're going to try and put some more, more of an analytical approach, perhaps, and looking at the form for the race. So your own selections, just to reiterate.
Yeah, we've been talking on a few podcasts now, haven't we, about who we're going for. And it's not that I've really strayed away from many, but I know there's 40 runners in the race and you don't want to back up every horse. But there's probably a group of horses, like Darren's mentioned, that I've been looking at probably before Cheltenham and post-Cheltenham as well now. Horses that I'm going to probably nail my feather to the cap. So the first one is Mr. Incredible. Currently around 14s in the market. I think will want as much rain as possible. But if you look at what this horse has done at Warwick in the Classic Chase and then at Cheltenham when rallying into third, up the hill in the Kimmuir. Angel's Dawn didn't run too bad a race in the Irish National. I know sometimes didn't really frank that form. But I'm still standing by the Kimmuir form is very, very good. So Mr. Incredible off a really handy mark. I think it's 145. He'll run off. So yeah, I'm very happy with him at 14s. Gaillard de Manille for Willie Mullins as well. Another one that's took my eye. I just hope he turns up here. I know Willie Mill on money back. So it doesn't really matter at this stage because you'll get your money back if you do back him. But Gaillard de Manille, the way he was raced in the National Chase, I don't think they'll do the same this time because they'll know he'll get the trip. I think he'll be a lot closer to the front. I'm not sure he would have won if Marlow Mission would have stood up. We'll never know, will we? But he definitely does stay the trip. He was another one that would probably want rain. And we saw last year, didn't we? A 7-year-old won the race. So that's got no issues there. And the other one I'll throw in the mix, I know I've mentioned Lamilos, and I think Car Rambler will run well, but he's very short price. The other one, like Darren mentioned, why I was smiling, Royal Maget at 50 to 1 with William Hill. This is my outside selection. I know I've been talking it up. I know I should probably put up Longhouse's Poet as well because it was that race that really probably sparked him to wanting to go for this when finishing second last time out. But I think at Longhouse's Poet, what currently 16s, and you got 50s about Royal Maget, and I thought Royal Maget ran a much better trial that day. I'll be one in the 50s, and I know he's a bit older, 11 years of age, but I think he's been set up for this race all season. I just think he'll run a cracker. So Royal Maget for me at a big price, but Gaillard de Manille and Mr. Incredible as my other shorter price selections. But Kate, everyone wants to know who you are going for as well. So who do you fancy in the Grand National?
Honestly, I've been toying with this left, right and centre, but I'm pleased to hear that you agree with Nicole Holiday anyway about Mr. Incredible here, and then with Darren Owen as well about Royal Marsh. So at least you've got some people who support your selections then, because I doubt many people are going to be supporting my main selection. I've run the trends on this race, my own trends then, and I've tried to match them up against our current lineup, and you won't believe the horse has come out on top. The Big Breakaway.
Oh, the Big Breakaway.
Every single time he ticked another box, I thought, this can't be going this way. This surely can't. I was fighting it, James. I was trying to fight stats, which you can never do. The biggest concern for him, of course, is that pulling up last time out, which is never ideal. And he's a horse where you don't want to hang your hat on by any means, and he's obviously never fulfilled the potential we fully thought he'd have. But as Darren said himself earlier, you want a horse that stays all day then for this, but also has that turn of foot. He lacks that slight turn of foot, admittedly, but he certainly stays all day. He's got the scope to be able to cope with the fences. He hasn't faced them before, but we know that not facing the national fences is now not something you can really crab a horse with anyway. He's the right age. He's the right racing. He's got the right weight on his back. He's had the 3 runs this season, which is a positive. And unfortunately, as I was ticking every box, I thought, I'm going to have to side with him now because I'll kick myself if I don't. So the Big Breakaway is the main one. He's actually only 20 to 1 shot. I thought I might be getting bigger about him. So potentially a few other people might disagree. And Vanier or Vanillier, whichever cultural way you want to say it there. But I adore this horse. Again, an 8-year-old off the right weight there and rated 147. I adore this horse. His run last time out was a cracker, I thought, finishing second behind Pemboy. So hopefully now this might just be all of the stars aligning for Vanier as well to come good, a horse that I've followed throughout his entire career. So they're my two, little bit rogue, admittedly. Well, that is everything from us on this very special episode of the Inside Track, brought to you by William Hill. A big thank you to James and to Darren Owen for all of their hard work, thoughts and insight ahead of the most famous race of them all. Big thank you to all of our ambassadors as well for their selections. Always great to hear from them, and it's always great to hear from you as well. Do remember to like and subscribe to the William Hill YouTube page so you never miss an episode, and do leave us a comment below in the comments section with your own selections for the Grand National. Do remember that we are paying 6 places on the Grand National, as William Hill are the official betting partner of the biggest race of them all. Best of luck this weekend. Enjoy the action, and we'll speak to you again soon.